Hi, welcome back to management. We have just finished chapter 7, Innovation and Change, and now we're getting into a really interesting chapter, Global Management. I'm going to try really hard to keep this under an hour, but there's a lot to pack, and it's a fascinating chapter. And I did add some content to it that I hope you'll find interesting. So here we go, Global Management. Learning outcomes for this chapter are: we'll discuss the impact of global business and the trade rules and agreements that govern global business, why companies choose to standardize or adapt their business procedures. Basically, all that means is, should they, go with when in Rome, do as the Romans, or my way's the highway. Explain the different ways that companies can organize to do business globally. Pretty straightforward. How do you export, have a licensing agreement, etc. Explain how to find favorable business climates. Where do you go? What countries? Is where the customers the best way to set up your actual organization in terms of your headquarters? Discuss the importance of identifying and adapting to cultural differences. Culture always plays the biggest role, by the way. I'm going to try to, again, give you enough, but at the same time, I have to be succinct. If you find this lecture interesting, remember Global Business BUS 61 is an elective, and you might like it. Let's see how to successfully prepare workers for international assignments, and that's going to apply for those of you who are interested in that major. So first, let's go with global business definition. Very basically, buying and selling of goods and services by people from different countries. That's it. It impacts multinational corporations. They own business in 2 or more countries. Here I'm using the author's example of Harley Davidson. This is on page 160. I updated it. The book was, the data here is to 2017. So I looked it up, and it was interesting actually to see your author, when he did this, 2017, 38% of its sales were outside the U.S. When I checked on the Harley website today, in October 2020, the 2019 sales outside the U.S. were 42%. So that's an increase of 38 to 42. Way to go, Harley. Which was, by the way, very interesting, considering that sales were down. So sales were down just about in every continent, but the shares shifted, right? So even though sales decreased in every continent, the percentage sales outside the U.S. increased, which is perfect because it shows that it goes to the argument that it's just smart to not put all your eggs in the domestic basket. All right. Direct foreign investment, usually referred to as foreign direct investment, FDI. This is when a company either builds a new business or buys a part of an existing business in a foreign country. I say part because FDI doesn't have to be a whole 100% situation. It can, in fact, Disney operates in Shanghai, China, and the only way that Disney was able to get there was to agree to, I believe it was a 45%. So technically, Disney is not the owner of Disney Shanghai, but it's still FDI. All right, the example that I have for you here is Airbus. Airbus is a European conglomerate that makes airplanes, among other things. And to try to avoid tariffs or curtail tariffs that were imposed a while back, it built a factory in Alabama for $600 million and has been selling their airplanes to these American companies here. This is where the article comes from. Again, so those are, ways of looking at global business. Your author also, I like the intro where he's reminding you, just look at where your phone's made. Look at where your T-shirt's made, your shoes, right? And so obviously, we are all very much interdependent on trade from one another. And as you know, most of your stuff comes from outside the U.S. All right, so now let's go on to what makes global business, difficult, or what can constrain trade, and that's going to be trade barriers. Just as the picture shows, it's just a barrier that helps or that hurts or reduces or even prevents trade. It's a government-imposed regulation that increases the cost and restricts the number of imported goods. Almost always, trade barriers are political tools. They're meant to be economic adjustments for the domestic market, but the unintended consequences of trade barriers almost always outweigh any benefit that you may have in the short term. So this is basically, let me just kind of go into some of the examples here. So first, let's look at what kind of trade barriers. Again, it's a barrier that a government would erect to try to keep foreign entity, foreign seller, manufacturer, or country at bay because maybe their product is outselling your domestic product. So the first kind of barrier, the easiest, the most popular probably, is a tariff. And just easy to remember, a tariff is a tax. A tariff is a tax. It's a direct tax on imported goods. So lots and lots of stuff going on with that. In fact, let me just kind of get right to it. What I had here for you was from the taxfoundation.org. It's a nonprofit think tank that all they do is analyze tax policy. And this is, the analysis, current analysis as of September 18, 2020, of the impact of the U.S. tariffs and retaliatory actions that we've had with this current administration. So you have the imposed tariff, the threatened tariffs, retaliatory, and the totals. Retaliatory tariffs are basically when you slap a tariff on another country, they'll retaliate and slap a tariff on you, right? So if you think about the imposed tariff and the jobs affected by it, and even the retaliatory tariffs and the jobs affected by it, it has an effect. And so this kind of walks you through what the tariffs were, the recent ones. You can look at the full timeline and the key findings, right? Trump administration tariffs will reduce economic output, will reduce income, and reduce employment. Again, some of you might be surprised by this because you're thinking, I thought this was a good thing. Just remember, it's a tax. But in this case, we're paying the tax. Consumers pay the tax because the goods cost more. So $80 billion worth of new taxes on Americans by levying tariffs on thousands of products. Let's see, estimated to reduce long-run GDP. And by the way, this is not a political thing. It could be Democrat, could be Republican. Most of the time when you look at the Tax Foundation analysis on any tariffs, you will see the unintended consequence far outweigh any benefit. So anyway, it just kind of goes on and on. If you're interested, I think it would be you would be wise to educate yourself and to see what the unintended consequences are to the gross domestic product, because they're there. All right, so that's for that. Let's see, non-tariff. So there are cases where you don't impose a tariff, and maybe you cannot impose a tariff. And the reason you cannot is because you signed an agreement with another country, and the agreement explicitly stated that you would never slap a tariff on each other. But maybe you disagree about some other stuff. So now you're thinking, okay, I can't slap a tax on you. What I'll have to do is go around the tax and find another way of creating a barrier. So we call those non-tariff barriers, a non-tax method of increasing the cost of or reducing the volume of imported goods. So that's that. Let's go and look now at what the non-tariff barriers are. The first one is going to be a quota. It's a specific limit on the number or volume of imported products. I use the example here. This is one of my favorite movies, the Italian movie that's called The Bicycle Thief in English. I recommend it. It's a classic. Italy, strong history of making really powerful movies. Not all, but a lot, right? And so it wants to protect its industry. Remember, we're going to talk about culture in a little bit. And if you think about the arts, right, in your culture, that arts are a big part of your culture. Why do we have museums? Why do we have national museums, right? And so in this case, Italy has decided, wait, we can't compete with Hollywood. Hollywood has a global footprint that is, in fact, only one country exceeds Hollywood when it comes to producing movies, and that's India with Bollywood, right? So how does how does Italy protect itself? It doesn't have the budget with its industry to even try to compete with Hollywood. And so what it does is it has a quota. Italy has a film quota, and this is a film quota that's recent. Again, this is coming. I have the hyperlink over here. It's a recent quota that's directed at streaming, and in this particular case, the live streaming, they're seeing all these American content coming into, let's say, Netflix, and now that they've created a quota so that Netflix has to stream 53% of its film, not just Italian. There just wouldn't be that wouldn't work, but European, and so that's the deal there. Well, not the deal, but the restriction they have there. Again, this is fairly recent. This is from Variety, and this is, in this case, Italy defending its quota, right? There it is, 53% European content during 2019, and that will rise to 60% by 2021. So that's to be continued. All right, voluntary export restraint. Just as it sounds, in this case, the exporter voluntarily decides to impose basically its own quota. If you think about it, a voluntary export restraint is basically a self-imposed quota. It's a voluntarily imposed limits on the number or volume of product exported to a particular country. The author is using a pretty famous example. It's a feud, an ongoing feud between Brazil and Mexico. What Brazil and Mexico have in common is they both make cars, but they have very, very different markets. Most of the cars manufactured in Mexico are not sold in Mexico. They're exported, majority of them, to the US and other parts of the world. However, Brazil has a robust domestic market, and its industry does also export outside of Brazil, but it sells domestically as well. So their industries are very different. And because of that, Brazil wanted to protect its own domestic auto industry that directed at its domestic consumers, and has imposed voluntary, has not imposed, but Mexico has had to voluntarily restrain its export to Brazil so that it could meet some of the requirements that Brazil has for trade with Mexico. Government import standards. So this is established to protect the health and safety of citizens, but is used to restrict imports as well. And so there's all kinds of examples here. I know Korea, in fact, the example here from your author is Europe. And so Europe and Korea, until recently, restricted U.S. raised beef due to all the hormones that are used for American meats. Europeans have all kinds. They actually have laws banning the stuff, and so in essence, an American cattle farmer or grower, sorry, I don't know what the terms are, cannot export anywhere in Europe if their beef is being raised using hormones, right? Until recently, it was the same thing with Korea, until the previous administration, the Obama administration, passed a trade agreement, a bilateral trade agreement with Korea called KORUS, K-O-R-U-S. And because of that KORUS trade agreement with South Korea, now U.S. export of beef is permitted into Korea. All right, so let's move on to other types of non-tariff barriers. So what we have here is, let's see, subsidies. So let's start with subsidies first of all. You guys have all heard of farm subsidies. I thought it would be the easiest example to use. A subsidy is a government loan, a government grant, or tax deferment given to domestic companies to protect them from foreign competition. Again, I can't think of an example that's more relatable to all of you than the farm subsidies. U.S. farm subsidies, this is from a government accounting office here, government figures, cost about $20 billion every year. That's how much American taxpayers are paying to support U.S. farm subsidies. There's all kinds of interesting stuff that happens as an outcome of that. For example, this explains why corn is everywhere, right? Corn is heavily subsidized, which is why you'll find corn in soda. Your corn syrup, right, comes from corn. Speaking of Brazil, if you get Coca-Cola, from Brazil, even South America or even North America, you'll find that Mexican Coca-Cola and Pepsi product is made not with corn sugar, but with cane, right? Cane sugar. Well, you'll find that cane sugar is actually cheaper to grow in Brazil. It's more abundant. It has more calories to produce in cane, which generates more energy if you're going to use that for energy as well. Why would you want cane as energy, sugar cane? Well, the same reason that we're using corn for ethanol in the U.S. It takes a lot more corn to make ethanol in the U.S. than it does for Brazil to make ethanol for their cars. Literally, most Brazilian cars run off their cane sugar. And that's because Brazil has an abundance of cane. So anyway, the point is, even ethanol is going to cost more in the U.S. because we're subsidizing the corn that's used to make the ethanol, and on top of that, even the ethanol industry. So some people might be thinking, like, why can't we get the cheaper ethanol from Brazil? Well, because that's the whole point of having subsidies, so we can protect corn growers. All right, it's not economically viable, not viable perhaps, but it's economically less advantageous for us to do it that way, but that's part of the deal of protecting the farming industry. All right, then we're getting to custom classification. So this is assigned to imported products by government officials that affect the size of the tariff and the imposition of the import quota. I have a couple things for you here. So that hyperlink here is to a really cool story. I listen to Marketplace, marketplace.org. That's Kai Risdahl here and Molly Wood. I really love this program. I listen to it every day. I recommend you check it out, marketplace.org. They have a podcast. It's through NPR. Find your local NPR station. And this was a really cool podcast that they did about the tariffs at the height of some of the tariffs. So this is, you can see here, 5/2019 is when the story came out. And Kai Risdahl, interviewed Columbia, the clothing company, to have them explain how they go around some of the tariffs. And this was a really cool story. I've shared it with my global business class, and it's always, everybody's just kind of, I recommend you check out the podcast, by the way, if you're interested. I might even making an assignment. But there's a shirt there, and so first of all, imports, right? When you check out their website, in fact, I have it here. When you check out the story, so this is on Marketplace. Here's a story. There's a reason your Columbia shirt has a tiny pocket near the waistline, and that reason has one purpose. And here's a tiny little pocket right there on the waist. And the reason comes from this, the harmonized tariff schedule showing the rules. So it's looking at like a very boring document. I have my hyperlink here. I'm always checking it out. But when you're looking at tariffs, you could see that there are some tariffs right there, 26.9. So let's say 27% if you're bringing this kind of clothing here from overseas, right? Women or girls' blouses. And it kind of goes on to containing 36% or more weight of wool, animal hair, blah, 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 or other. And here we go, 26% for other, right? But then when you scroll down, and what you start to see that, oh, look at that one. That one's 16%. Okay, why is it 16%? These blouses over here. Well, there you go. Excludes garments with pockets below the waist, a ribbed waistband, or other means. And so what results here is that the company has figured out that if they put a tiny little pocket in the right place, they save money, is what that's all about. So the nurse pocket drops the tariff from 27% to 16%. Again, I encourage you to check out Marketplace. I'm a big fan. I'll just say it. I donate. Yes, I donate. And on top of that, Kai and Molly, they're really funny, and they drink beer, and that's all right with me. So, and they drink beer on the air even. Kai Rizdal, that guy, loves pumpkin spice beer, his favorite. Molly a little bit, but not as much. All right. Trade agreements, general trade agreements. So this is really, now we're done. We just talked about barriers, and now we're switching gears. We're doing the opposite of a barrier. What could be the opposite of a barrier? It's when a bunch of countries realize we're stronger together than not. And so I give you an example, by the way, chorus, right? That's if you remember what chorus is. I just said it earlier, K-O-R-U-S. Well, chorus is a hybrid word of Korea and US, right? And that is exactly what that is. It's a trade agreement. So let's start with a little bit of history when it comes to trade agreement. If you want, we can go back to World War II. 1939 is the beginning of the war. 1945 is the end of the war. Why am I telling you that? Well, because 1947, the Allies come up with this thing called GATT. The Allies agreed to disagree on, slapping tariffs to each other and all kinds of other trade barriers. And they decide together, we're going to have an agreement on tariff and trade. We're going to call it GATT, Worldwide Agreement. Well, worldwide for the signatories. Reduced and eliminated tariffs, limited government subsidies, and established protection for intellectual property, although that came later with something called TRIPS. And it later, because of intellectual property restrictions and limitations, in 95, it was, replaced. It was replaced. That's true. I always like to say that it was beefed up, because when the World Trade Organization was created in 1995, the bylines of the rules of the WTO are GATT rules. So basically, all we did is we took an agreement and we converted it and made it into a living thing, an organization based in Geneva, Switzerland. And so let's again, I'm kind of highlighting this thing so we can move on to the WTO, but very, very important that you understand GATT is still alive as part of the WTO, basically the articles of the WTO. The WTO deals with global rules and trade between nations. It ensures that trade flows as smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. The WTO is also responsible for countries realizing they're better together than not and getting into these regional trade zones. So chorus is a trade agreement, but we're getting into something more interesting. If you guys have all heard of NAFTA, which is dead, by the way. North American Free Trade Agreement is dead, and it was replaced. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. So anyway, the regional trade agreement, before I get there, let's talk a little bit more about the WTO, the World Trade Organization. I have here a picture, there we go, a screenshot that I just did today of, in this case, it's from the World Trade Organization, and it's showing you a map, and it's called the Trade Dispute Map. This is the hyperlink for it. You can just Google WTO Trade Dispute Map, will come right up. And so, in fact, let me just bring it up so you could see it. You could select as a complainant or respondent. It's very cool because it's interactive. So, for example, if I wanted to see, so first of all, some have 0 cases. Anything that's gray is not a member of the WTO, right? Other countries that are not gray are members. If they're light, it means nobody's picking any fights with Greenland. Just leave them alone. And so actually that's not true. If I click on Greenland, no, there's nothing. Good. So nobody's complaining about Greenland. Greenland's not complaining anybody. Let's go to actually, let's go to Chile. So if I click on Chile, there we go. Over here, I can see that there are 2 cases that Chile has against the United States, and we have 1 case against Chile. Let's check that out real quick. So there's issues over salmon. Well, there's a long story about Chile and salmon and whether it's farmed salmon or not farmed salmon. If you're farming it in the ocean, is it really farmed? I don't know. Anyway, there's a disagreement there. And by the way, the stakes are high when you're talking about the North American appetite for salmon, and especially wild, delicious salmon. And so, in this case, the U.S. Has a duty, has a countervailing duty investigation on salmon. And also on top of that, we have a Dumping and Subsidy Offset Act about probably the same thing. And so how does Chile react? We pick on Chile and we're saying, look, you guys, we don't like what you're doing with salmon. What do they do in retaliation? Well, there we go. Beverages, that delicious California wine. Chile has amazing wine, right? If you've ever tried a nice Chilean Malbec, I recommend them. And so in this case, they have a robust wine industry, very strong, very good. And California, of course, has its own. But now what's Chile doing is it's slapping taxes on California wines so that it's protecting its own local domestic wine industry and making California wines more expensive. You get the idea. It's very cool because, again, it's interactive. On the other hand, if you want to see what the U.S. has got going on, there we go. We've been busy, right? So we've got 8 cases against Canada. They have 20 cases against us, 10 brought by Mexico, 7 against. Now, why am I showing you that? I'm showing you that for the simple reason. In fact, let me just pull it up here real quick. I wasn't planning on doing this, but this is fascinating, so I'm glad you agree. Now I can show it to you. Let's see. So let's just for fun see what's going on here with the United States. There we go. This is a really cool website, the oac.world. You get some super cool visualizations, and you get to know a little bit more about the country, by looking at, so for example, our GDP 2018 was $20 trillion. We export about 1.4 trillion. And, we import 2.4. Obviously, that's a trade deficit. You get the idea. But more importantly, let's see who our best friend is, right? Who is our best friend? Think about it. Before I go down there, think about who do we export with the most? What country buys the most from us, right? That's your best customer, isn't it? That is exactly what that is. And so our best customer is Mexico. And our second best customer is Canada, right? We sell most to Mexico and then to Canada. By the way, a couple years ago was the other way around. We sold most to Canada and then to Mexico. Here in California, Mexico is definitely our top trade partner by a long shot when it comes to sales, right? Now, in terms of imports, interestingly, you guessed it, China, of course, China. But we also buy a lot from Mexico and Canada. So very important markets for us. Now, having said that, consider that we're bickering with each other over trade. All right, so that's the trade dispute map. Let's go into regional trade zones. There's a bunch of stuff here. So Africa here, AFTZ, TFTA. There's a bunch of other ones, by the way. There's ECOWAS, which is on the West African border, on the West African side. There's several other trade agreements. ECOWAS is fascinating because they even try to do their own currency. Anyway, all that to say that there's several agreements at play. We can't really go over all of them, but just know, APEC, of course, is huge. ASEAN is huge. The TPP was killed by this administration, so it shows up here. It would have been a really, probably one of the most important trade agreements on the planet until it got destroyed. Let's see, there we go, the CAFTA. Maastricht Treaty of Europe is what led to the euro and to the European Union. There's a little bit more there with Schengen. Of course, NAFTA, I just told you earlier, NAFTA is dead. NAFTA is dead. NAFTA is now called the USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada Trade Agreement. We'll do more of that in global, but for the sake of time, I'm just leaving NAFTA in here. And then we have the Union of South American Nation, USAN. We're missing Mercosur. It's okay. This is a management book. We'll do more in global, but just note there are other trade agreements, and also they change because, for example, Venezuela can't seem to behave, and so Venezuela has been dropped from a bunch of trade agreements. All right, so that's for that. Let's now go to the importance of trade barriers and free trade agreements. So what I have here for you is first, some basic ways of looking at trade. Yes, free trade agreements, they increase our choices. Think about that. Think about maybe you have relatives that have come visit you from outside the US, and while they're staying with you, I guess this is pre-COVID, while they're staying here visiting you, they go shopping and they buy all kinds of stuff to bring back home. And sometimes the irony is that maybe they're buying things that might even be made in their continent or in their area, and it's cheaper here. And the reason things are cheaper here than sometimes even in the places where they're made is because we have a pretty open market. We're not as open as we could be, but we're pretty open, the United States. And we do have, again, this administration has ramped up a lot of tariffs. So in these last 4 years, we've definitely closed up more than we have ever before in modern history. And so that's putting a lot of free trade stuff into question. And it's going to, what it does when you restrict trade and you have more trade barriers, then when you have trade barriers, it increases the prices, it decreases the choices, etc., etc. So here, what we know is that the free trade agreements increases choice, it increases competition, and increases purchasing power. The more purchasing power you have, the more stuff you can buy. It leads to decrease in the cost of food, decrease in clothing, necessities, and luxury cost as well. Free trade agreements create new business opportunities and intensify competition. It keeps you on your toes. If you think about it, in fact, free trade is congruent with capitalism, isn't it? Capitalism is all about competition. And here you're saying, not only do I believe in competition and I believe in capitalism, but I believe in international competition. Bring it on. We should be improving and doing better, etc., etc. And so that's that. Now what I have here for you is the Global Competitiveness Index. I thought I would put that up to kind of give you an update. This is from here. And it's showing you that Singapore is ranking number 1 in the world. The US is number 2. Hong Kong is number 3. And then so you can see the best places, right, in terms of global competitive index to do business and for productivity, etc. Of course, toward the end here, you have countries that are more difficult to access. All right, now let's kick gear into now that you've decided to do this thing. And free trade managers are responsible to address the competition when it comes to free trade. So there you go. Managers are the ones who should decide, whoa, we have foreign competition over here. What should we do? Do we fight it? Do we try to improve ourselves? How can we improve this thing and compete with a foreign entity that's setting up shop here or exporting a cheaper product? By the way, that's what we spend a lot of time talking about and analyzing and covering in global. Global consistency. All right. Think of this as one size fits all, right? Wouldn't it be great if you could make a car and everybody would buy that car? You made one car and you don't even have to modify it and it sells everywhere the same way, right? Well, that's obviously fantasy, right? That can't work. A multinational company conducts business in different countries using the same rules, guidelines, policies, procedures. Again, on paper, it sounds like a great idea, but very, very difficult to execute, of course, because of culture. Countries do things differently. It's valued because it simplifies decision. Wouldn't it be great? In the old days, and go back to the 60s and 70s, when you had huge corporations with international headquarters, And that's what they used to do. They had central headquarters, maybe somewhere in New York, making decisions for outfits outside the US. And that didn't last very long. It didn't work out. It involves risk of using management procedures poorly suited to particular countries. So here we go. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is local adaptation. When in Rome, do as the Romans, right? So you modify rules, guidelines, policies, and procedures. You try to adapt to differences in foreign customers, governments, and regulatory agencies. This involves the risk of losing cost effectiveness and productivity. For those of you who remember from your econ class, the name of the game is economies of scales, right? Once you achieve economies of scales, you lower your per unit cost, right? You get more efficiencies, your cost drops, so your price drops, and so your sales increase, etc., etc. The goal, if you can, is to achieve global economies of scales, right? That's the whole point. But again, local adaptation makes that difficult. Some companies get away with it. Think about, okay, so Rolex doesn't have to adapt, does it, as a product? Everybody in the world pretty much going to buy Rolex just the way it is. I'm sure they have different variations per market, maybe bigger, I don't know. I know a lot of people like big watches in the US. Maybe you got to make sure you have that bling show up everywhere. Maybe not quite as big in other places. I don't know, but you get the idea. That doesn't work everywhere. Your author gave us an example here of burgers, right? Even cornflakes. How some places on page 167 like soggy cornflake. The horror. All right, so moving on to forms of global business. So now that we've kind of covered that, let's talk about how we even initiate this whole global thing. Number one, exporting. You sell domestically produced product to customers in foreign countries, right? That's it. You keep making it here. It sounds great. It's working out. People have jobs. And you sell it overseas. What's wrong with that? Well, it's a great idea. We'll see that the problem with that is, of course, that you're subject to tariffs, right? You're subject to costs, all kinds of things, which in the end might reduce your competitiveness. So then the next level could be a cooperative contract, where a foreign business owner pays a company a fee for the right to conduct that business in his or her country. So that may be the next step for you. Then you can get into the more realistic, probably areas that are more common now, which are, of course, licensing agreements. That's when a domestic company receives royalty payments. So you receive payment for allowing another company to produce the product, sell its services, or use its brand name in a specified foreign market. You'll find out the problem with that is several. It can create some kind of dilution, where maybe you have a vendor that's not being careful, and your product is getting, let's say it's a luxury product, and you want exclusive distribution, but now you have a distributor that's all over the place, and so your product is no longer exclusive, and that lowers the price, the cost of the product. And because your strategy is exclusivity, we'll do more of that. Actually, in marketing management, you do more of that. That will hurt you. Franchise, by the way, a franchise is a type of licensing agreement, right? It's so McDonald's is a franchise, and if you're franchisee at McDonald's, then you have a licensing agreement with the franchisor, McDonald's, that tells you what you cannot do, etc. A collection of networked firms in which the manufacturer licenses the entire business to another person or organizations. In global business, there's so many stories about being careful with that. Probably the most famous one is Pizza Hut. Pizza Hut decided to open a franchises in Thailand, and its franchisees realized, wait, what? That's it? That's running this thing is easy. I can do that. So why am I paying these people all of this franchise payment, the licensing payment? and they decided to break off and create their own franchise called the Pizza Company. Pizza Hut sued them, of course, in Thai courts, and of course, Pizza Hut lost. So the founders of one of the biggest franchise in Thailand today, the Pizza Company, were all defectors who initially had signed up with Pizza Hut. Again, that's one of the risks. Let's see, the forms of global business continues to treat strategic alliance. So this we're getting into an area that's more promising. There's a lot of, in fact, I'm giving you kind of a great case study on like best practices here with my example. A joint venture is the most common strategic alliance. So a strategic alliance per se is if two companies decide to combine resources, cost, risk, and people, and they can still do business as strategic alliance, which means company A remains company A, company B remains company B, and that's it. They don't create a third company. On the other hand, a joint venture is exactly that. It's the most common type of strategic alliance, but a joint venture is two existing companies collaborate to form a third company. The example that I'm giving you here is GE Safran. So GE, of course, you all know General Electric, American company. Safran is a French company. They used to be called SNECMA, CMA. Changed their names a few years back. It's one of the most successful, oldest joint ventures out there. It's 46 years old this year, 2020. And these two companies together got now corner 40% of the world market share in jet fuel, right? So this is straight from their website, CFMA. You probably, when you fly, if you ever look at the brochure that's in the seat, you'll know what kind of plane you're flying in, and often that will tell you what kind of motor it's using. But that is the most popular engine in the world. So not only is this such a successful joint venture, but it's passed the test of time, where they're both 50-50 and they're both benefiting by combined 40% world market share. Why is this such a big deal? Well, if you think about it, GE sells less than that, as a share of market share for the world. Together, they do better than GE individually or Safran individually. Food for thought. All right, moving along. Let's go to wholly owned affiliates, foreign offices, facilities, manufacturing plants that are 100% owned by the parent company. The global new venture. This one is interesting. New companies that are founded with an active global strategy. Does it mean that on day one they're global? Not really. I mean, unless they have the resources and capabilities and they've really worked at that for a while, most companies are not going to be what's called born global on day one. On the other hand, if you want to look at the more pragmatic definition, this is from London School of Business here. Companies who have reached a share of foreign sales of at least 25% within a time frame of 2 to 3 years after their establishment. That's kind of like the more pragmatic definition of a global new venture or a born global company. They have sales, employees, and financing in different countries. That's what differentiates them. All right, now that we've done that, let's go on to the next phase, which is how do we know where to go? How do we find the best business climate? For that, you want to have easy access to growing markets. This is where you have to kind of have the right number. You have to have when you look at the two variables here, and the variables are going to be population of the country versus population growth, right? And so once you have you have to create, let's call it an index instead of a variable. Once you find the magic index, then that's your first step in deciding where to go. What I have here for you is the CIA World Factbook ranking in terms of GDP growth. This is based on data given by countries, so unfortunately, some of them are only as old as what's available by some countries. But so Libya, which kind of makes sense actually, if you think about, wow, Libya was the fastest growing economy in the world. Well, yes, that makes a lot of sense because, of course, Libya's economy is in total shambles recently. And so if you look at these countries, you see, they're growing 7%. So very quickly things drop, right? And so I'm just trying to find out, like, well, let's look at some of the, there we go. So there's Ireland showing up at 7.2. Why Ireland? I'm starting to identify where we are in terms of getting close to trillion-dollar economies. There it is, number 21. And this is an argument for anybody who's debating whether or not China matters. Not only is it the second biggest economy in the planet, right, at GDP, but it's also the most populous on the planet, at least for a few more years. India will surpass China soon as the most populous country in the world. But when you look at its GDP growth, it's insane, 7%, right? India, by the way, is right there at 6.7. So that's why also I'm showing you this because yes, you want to calculate the fast-growing market, but also it's not a bad idea to have a fast-growing market where people have purchasing power. You want to choose an effective but cost-efficient office manufacturing location. What you find out is that sometimes where you're going to locate your offices might not always be exactly where you're going to operate. I'll do more on that in a little bit, but Brexit really did a number on the British economy big time. So as you know, Brexit is a term used for Great Britain having left the European Union. And it's on its own now. And so what does that mean? Well, it's completely exposed. I mean, ask yourself, who has been Great Britain's number one trade partner in recent history? Well, that's a no-brainer. The European Union. And so whereas the UK, being part of the EU, was benefiting from all kinds of trade agreements, right? No tariffs, no quotas, no barriers, and just a flow of good going from border to border and open borders. By the way, this is called Schengen, right? Schengen was the agreement that enabled Europe to not have physical borders anymore. You can drive from one country to the other. No problem. You'll see a sign that will say, welcome to Germany, but here you go on the Autobahn at 150 miles an hour, no problem. I guess actually that's not true. When you go from Germany, let's say, to the Czech Republic, you will have to slow down a little bit. But anyway, that's just kind of a way for you to think about that. Identify and minimize the political risk to the company. That's another one. Maybe what I was about to tell you with Brexit is there's an exodus of especially financial corporations. By the way, they're choosing the Netherlands. The Netherlands is the biggest winner when it comes to Brexit because a lot of financial institutions have left London, have left the UK, and have gone straight to the Netherlands. So power to you, Amsterdam. All right, this is what I'm going to show you now is when you identify and minimize the political risk. This is not in your book, but I wanted to kind of add that. This is a think tank that companies contract out with to find out more information about where they're operating. Should they stay? Should they go? What's the deal? So it's controlrisks.com. And every year they release their control risk map, which is really awesome. So this is a 2020 risk map, and because it's really hard to read anything, what I want to do is kind of show you this. So this is the full PDF version, and let's first start with the legend, right? So when you start with legend, there we go. You're looking at security risk forecast right here. So that's what that would look like. Maritime risk, yes, pirates. Very much alive, but not the ones, with the eye patch going yo ho ho. These are the guys, scary with machine guns, costing industries billions of dollars. So security risk forecast from low to extreme, financial, physical, human assets of a company, willingness, capabilities, public security to protect assets and personnel, etc. So, and then the political risk is, you'll see it's a little square sideways like that, with the legend going from very low to extreme. Here we're talking about likelihood of government interference and political instability and their impact on the business environment. So now that you know what the legend looks like, well, I mean, look at New Zealand, man. New Zealand doing a great job with COVID. And on top of that, what a place. I'm surprised it's not even very low. Probably is very low maybe now. Very pragmatic, interesting leader. China, there you go. China, medium for the political. Some people are surprised. They go, what, really? But communist country, the whole thing, what's going on? There's predictability sometimes in central governments. As long as you know, you can predict the behavior, the political risk can be low. Russian Federation, now you're talking about medium, etc. I know what you want to see. You probably want to see what's going on with the U.S. So here we go. Low, Canada's low. Mexico, there we go. Oh man. Well, it depends where you go, right? So if you want to go hang out in Baja, keep driving. Keep going south of Baja, but from Tijuana till halfway through, you've got some risk over here. You've got an M for the political risk to medium over here. Mexico City over here, Morelos and all that area. Not looking super hot when it comes to secuestros and things like that. There's still problems there, kidnappings. But you can see, Panama. Wow, look at that. Panama City, okay, a little bit, but otherwise, Venezuela. We talked a little bit about that earlier. Parts of Colombia, still some remnants of the FARC going on over there. Let's check out Argentina. Wow, look at that, right? So what does that mean? You're not going to get kidnapped, but doing business over there is super sketchy because, there we go, in terms of going back to our legend, the political risk forecast is high. All right, so that's it for that. Let's move along. Factors that determine the growth potential of global markets. So, purchasing power, I talked about that a little bit ago. Relative cost of a standard set of goods and services in different countries. I included here the chart from your author, right? How car purchases vary with purchasing powers around the world. And so, what's cool about this is, going to, let me see if I can, there we go. You can see that the USA, right? Numbers of cars per 1,000 people, it's the highest. I know in class it's always interesting when my students are surprised. I ask them, I go, well, you're surprised that there's 800 cars for every 1,000 people, right? How many of you have more cars in your household than you have people? And invariably in a class of about maybe 45 students, I will have about 10 students raise their hands. And of course, there you go in terms of number of cars per 1,000 people. This is why, if you think about what Tata did with the Tata Nano, cheapest car in the world, tiny little car, what he wanted to do was genius. He wanted to try to have car for people who in India, when he saw that people were relying really on mopeds and things. Anyway, you get the idea. The way this works is when you look at that curve, right? The purchasing power per capita versus number of cars is looking like it's a straight line right across going up the axis. All right, moving along. The degree of global competition is determined by the number and quality of companies that already compete in a foreign market. So again, and that's going to, your purchasing power, the country's purchasing power, as you decide where to go to do business, is going to determine who comes in. Earlier I was telling you about Brazil. Obviously right now, very difficult time for Brazil, but lots of scandals. There's, of course, very charismatic leaders, Lula, for example, and then after him, his handpick, Rousseff, big scandal having to do with corruption, jail time, the whole thing. Not good for business. And why am I bringing that up? Because while Lula was leading the place, and before all the stuff they discovered about bribes and things, the place was smoking hot, and demand was amazing, and the purchasing power was high. All right. Criteria for choosing an office location. So now we're talking about office location. You've got qualitative and quantitative factors, right? Workforce quality, company strategy. I was telling you earlier about the Netherlands. Netherlands was an interesting destination. It's always been a popular destination in all of Europe, Western Europe. The Netherlands is the country that ranks number one for the most languages spoken on average per capita. So people in the Netherlands routinely speak at least 3 languages, which is great if you want to have access to workforce that's highly educated, that's and on top of that can answer phones in just about any languages. So let's see. And then for the quantitative factors, of course, kinds of facilities being built, tariffs, non-tariff barriers, exchange rate, etc. Our COVID pandemic, as I record this here on October the 7th, our pandemic is kind of, doing a really interesting trick in terms of facilities being built. There's all these stories about multinationals that had commissioned headquarters, fancy, beautiful headquarters, and that are just canceling their orders and backing out. There's a whole kind of rethinking being done about whether or not it's going to be even necessary to build these huge facilities, or what kind of facilities will be available in the future. All right, let's move on to types of political risks. Case in point, Brexit, right? So first there's political uncertainty. Before I get into Brexit, we're talking about major changes in political regimes that can result from war, revolution, death of leaders, social unrest, and or other influential events. I mean, in terms of stuff going around the world right now, there's some Eastern Bloc countries with really hardcore right-wing factors coming in, and that's not doing well for foreign direct investment. People are thinking, I'm just going to wait until this thing pans out. Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, said she was going to step down. Germany is a very stable country, obviously, but still, people are kind of wondering, like, which party is going to get elected. There's some right-wing factions in Germany that are gaining, more momentum. So it's a little bit scary, and people are a little bit nervous. It makes markets nervous. Let's see, political uncertainty. So we were talking about, political uncertainty. Let's talk about policy. Policy uncertainty. Of course, that's when Brexit comes in, right? It's the risk associated with changes in laws and government policies that directly affect the way foreign companies conduct business. So your author, used that example, great example of, yes, Brexit. When the book was written, this is when we were looking at Brexit and the plan for Brexit and the company to break out March 29, 2019. A little update. The cost of Brexit as of February 2020 has been $260 billion, right? Now, about 200 billion pounds, by the way. That is higher as a cost than all UK payments to the EU of the past 47 years put together. We're talking even before there was a European Union. That's been the cost of Brexit. It has been absolutely devastating. So nationality comes with a price, right? I shouldn't call it nationality, maybe hardcore sovereignty, maybe, I don't know. But yes, so now the UK can say we're independent. We're no longer part of the blue wave of the European Union. There's one star going to be dropped right there. What's really interesting and challenging for the UK, by the way, is, as you know, Ireland is split, right? You got Northern Ireland, which belongs to the United Kingdom, and you have the sovereign nation of Ireland. However, of course, because it is an island, there's a border. And how do you deal with Northern Ireland? Are they gonna, they're gonna be all different currencies? Yes, because Northern Ireland is going to use the pound. It's always used the pound, and Ireland uses the euro. Are there going to be tariffs, taxes imposed? Maybe. It hasn't been determined yet. But no matter what, this has been a very, very costly little experiment. All right. strategies to minimize political risk. You can avoid the risk. You divest, which is selling or closing, selling off the business, or you sell the business. That's one way of doing it. You can postpone investment until the risk shrinks. So obviously that has happened throughout the world right now, but because of COVID, and then you could control it. You lobby foreign governments or international trade agencies to change laws, regulations, or trade barriers. That's what the WTO is for, right? You can try to do that. Or cooperate, use joint ventures and collaborative contracts. But then this whole issue of social responsibility comes in. Maybe you shouldn't be doing business with a regime that's questionable. So now let's kick into the next phase here, which is culture and becoming aware of cultural differences. I'm already over an hour, so I knew it was going to be a challenge for me to try to wrap this up in less than an hour. I'm trying. So culture is probably one of the most popular chapters in my global business class. Unfortunately, I'm going to try to do my best. So national culture, a set of shared values and beliefs that affects the perception, decision, and behavior of the people from a particular country. You all have heard of the terms homogeneous versus heterogeneous, right? A country that's very heterogeneous, like the United States, has cultures, immigrants from all over the world, which makes that culture extremely rich and awesome. Not to say that homogeneous cultures are not rich and awesome, but that's what they're going to lack. They're going to lack in terms of all of the different facets. So if you're a marketing company, if you're a company that's selling a product, power to you. Going after a homogeneous market's awesome because everybody tends to kind of think the same. So to describe a national culture can be challenging, right? Because you also have to look at whether or not the country and to what extent it's heterogeneous or homogeneous. So we have shared values in the United States. We have shared values in our national culture. We value hard work. We're very hardworking people. In fact, our friends in Europe think we're kind of insane because they're enjoying 1 month paid vacation. They're having all kinds of awesome retirements. And here we have people past retirement age that are still working, and they think it's kind of insane. That makes us very, very productive, but it comes with a price. So, we value that. There's a lot of things that maybe you take for granted that we value. So that's one of them, right? The other thing that we value is that you have to look at with national culture is consistent cultural dimensions that exist across countries. So this is where it gets super interesting. Up until recent history, our number one best friend as a nation was Canada, right? And I'm not saying they're not our best friend, but I showed you earlier that our top trade partner in terms of who buys the most stuff from us is Mexico, si se puede. Anyway, it used to be Canada. Now, some people think, well, that's just kind of weird. Well, why should it be? Canada, culturally, is the closest country to the United States. It's not England. It is Canada. Even our currency is called the dollar, right? And so if you think about what that entails, multinationals can have advertising in English and a particular ad in the United States and very often just export that same ad to Canada with barely making any changes or no change at all. And it works because that's how close the cultures are. You can't do that in any other place. It wouldn't work. So again, you kind of want to look, and I'm using the example of a broad example here of culture, but let's look at these things here. So Gert Hofstede very famously came up with cultural dimensions. If you haven't heard about it before, it's pretty cool because it's a way of trying to compare culture without falling into the stereotypical trap, and also it's very tough to look at these old modalities of comparing cultures when even the terms that are used kind of are lost. So let's look at that. So what I'll do here for that is go straight to the website, right? So the website from Hofstede, and you can go here and actually enter the countries that you're interested in comparing. Just because it's always fun to do. So of course we're going to start with the US, but after that, let's pick some other countries. Let's go with Japan, and let's look at Sweden, and let's look at, you know what? Let's look at Chile. There we go. And so what do we have? When we look at these four criteria, you have power distance, individualism, masculinity, and I'm not going to go through each and every single one of them, but it's one way of trying to compare these countries and seeing how different they are and how they rank. So let's go with just masculinity alone. And if you think about masculinity, basically what you're saying here is which countries have the most equality in terms of men and women, right? And Sweden is number one in the world. Sweden has the lowest level of masculinity. Masculinity, Japan wins as the country that makes it the hardest place for women to have equal footing with men in various elements, right? Countries that feel very, very comfortable with uncertainty, right? So in this case, Sweden and the United States, Sweden's the lowest with uncertainty avoidance. It's okay. They can deal with the change, whereas Japan is very, very high on uncertainty avoidance. So that would, there's, again, I know I'm trying to go a little bit quick here, but I just want to show you how different some of these countries are in terms of that. Now let's replace Japan just with one last one here. And let's go with Canada, and let's replace Chile with Si se puede, Mexico. All right, so here we go. What it shows you in terms of culture, let's get rid of Sweden. What it shows you in terms of culture is when you compare the blue to the green, you'll see that very, very much the blue and the green look like they're kind of neck and neck. So that is probably not a surprise, but it reinforces what we talked about earlier. Now, in terms of trade with Mexico, obviously many companies are used to dealing with each other, etc. But yes, if I get rid of Canada, you can see that dealing, there's going to be adjustments. And I think my page just froze. All right. So you get the idea. To determine the cultural characteristics, you compare the number of vertical distance. So this would be, look at all these countries here, and you could see kind of what we talked about. For example, let's go with masculinity, and the Netherlands, super, super low over here. And if Japan is here, sure enough, 95. You get the idea. All right. Now, cultural differences affect perception, understanding, and behavior. In order to succeed in global business, you should recognize cultural differences, decide how to adapt the company to differences, and ensure that adaptation are not based on outdated and incorrect assumptions. I always tell people, when you travel, when it's time for us to travel again one day, I always tell my students it's a really good idea to visualize yourself. Here you are at the Tom Bradley Terminal, LAX. You're about to take a flight somewhere outside the country. Visualize that you are leaving your culture behind. You're like removing this invisible backpack. You're putting in the seat next to you, and you leave it there until you come back. And if you do that and you travel with an open mind, you will just really have a better time traveling. But if you take that culture with you, you run a risk of what's called ethnocentrism, where you really tend to compare everything to your own culture, and that you're just going to be miserable, and you're going to make everyone miserable, and it's just going to be bad all around. All right, factors that increase the chance for successful international assignment: language, cross-cultural training. If you speak a second language, and if you're, by the way, if it's your birth language, if you're a native speaker, that's a huge advantage. Companies really like native speakers because you are going to navigate very well within the nuances. There's sometimes things that don't translate well, colloquialism, etc. And so you have an advantage. If you don't speak a second language, please learn one. I will tell you what I tell my students all the time, which is in 2020, if I were taking a business class and I had to pick a language, I would pick Mandarin. I would learn Chinese. When I started Chaffey College, we didn't teach Chinese. We taught German as an elective. Funny thing about Germany is if you ever go there, at least I can speak Munich, everybody speaks English. So it's great, love German, but I would say that if you were to pick up a language that you think would help you, differentiate you, and at least maybe get you in the door at some company where there's tons of competition, is some knowledge of Mandarin, some knowledge of Chinese. Nobody's saying you're going to be fluent. You're never going to be fluent. There's just too many things to learn about Chinese. Even Chinese people are not fluent when you look at all the characters. But you get the idea. Again, language and cultural training helps expat make faster adjustment to foreign cultures and perform better on their international assignment. An expatriate, an expat, someone who works overseas, they get paid better, etc. Document training focuses on identifying specific critical differences between cultures. Let's see. Cultural simulation, sometimes it's practice adapting to cultural differences. Field simulation. I studied in Cuernavaca for a while, and there were a lot of companies sending their expats over there back at the university I attended, Universidad Internacional, and they were there specifically for a couple months, some of them for several months, to just learn the proper Spanish, but also take specific classes in business or in marketing or even purchasing, etc. So that they learned the correct terms, but also they were taught by people in the field so that they really understood the how to do business with the culture as well. Adaptability screening, used to assess how well managers and their families are likely to adjust to foreign cultures. I'm sorry I don't have the data with me at the moment, but you could look it up, tell me if I'm wrong, but the last I checked, women are more likely to be successful as expats than men. When they tracked, there was a survey tracking expats in the long term, and women did better. Adapted maybe better or faster than men. Guys, we got work to do. Intercultural training, helping families prepare for the cultural differences they will encounter. So that's when you move. Obviously, all of these are for when you move your entire family there. All right, folks, and that's it for now. That's an hour and 10 minutes about. So we'll start on designing adaptive organizations on the next chapter. It's a great chapter, very important in management, making sure you have the right structure so that you can take advantage of the right environment. See you next time.